Good day, and welcome to our on-demand webinar, an introduction to the Lexile Framework for Reading. We're so pleased that you've taken time from your busy schedule to hear this information. This webinar is brought to you by Metametrics, creators of the Lexile Framework. My name is Matt Copeland, and I am the Director of Educator Engagement here at Metametrics. It's my pleasure to share this information with you, and please, at any time, if you have questions about the Lexile Framework or Lexile Measures, do reach out. My email address is mcopeland@lexile.com. Additionally, Jane Scott, our Senior Educational Facilitator, is with us today as well, and will be sharing links to all of the various tools and resources we mention in the chat window of this recording. Let's start with a quick overview of our time together today. We'll begin this webinar by discussing what is the Lexile Framework for Reading, and specifically, we'll talk about the two types of Lexile measures that are available: Lexile measures for students, which quantify reading ability, and also Lexile measures for text, which quantify the complexity of the words and sentences that appear on the page. From there, we'll move into talking about how the Lexile Framework for Reading and Lexile measures can be used. I'll then be sharing some free tools and research-based resources for utilizing Lexile measures. And we'll finish off our time together today with a few key takeaways to spur you to think about how you might be able to leverage the Lexile Framework for Reading in your everyday work. But first, let's take a look at the bigger picture. Nationally, more than 35 million students from all 50 states are receiving Lexile measures, and they are doing so in two possible ways. One, they are receiving Lexile measures because their state accountability assessment has been linked with the Lexile framework, and those measures are reported in addition to the student's scale score. Or two, at the local level, a student's school or district is using an interim benchmark assessment or an instructional program that has also been linked with the Lexile framework and reports a Lexile measure. So, in many cases, students may actually be receiving multiple Lexile measures within a given school year. On that note, here's a sampling of some of the partner products that have been linked with the Lexile framework. While this sampling isn't exhaustive, here are some of the product logos and icons from which you can see a student's performance expressed in Lexile measures. In fact, here at Metametrics, we don't believe K-12 education needs more assessments. We believe we need to be getting more from the assessments already being administered. Because of this belief, there is no such thing as a Lexile test. Google it. You won't find one. Instead, we link our scale to the assessments and programs so that teachers, parents, and students can leverage our tools to find resources at each student's unique ability level. Across the country, people have come to realize that Lexile measures empower stakeholders in various ways. Teachers are able to differentiate instruction and match students to texts at their own unique ability level, both for instruction and for independent reading. Students can connect with content as well as monitor and celebrate their own growth. And families become more knowledgeable about student learning and can participate in their child's growth by helping to reinforce reading outside of the school day. So let's dig in and build our understanding of the Lexile Framework for Reading. The Lexile Framework for Reading is a research-based scale for measuring both the complexity of text and the ability of individual readers. Much like a thermometer that employs the Fahrenheit or Celsius scale to measure temperature, the Lexile scale serves to measure reading complexity. And as the complexity of the text and the ability of readers increase, the mercury rises and the numbers increase, just as they do in a thermometer. Let me set a frame of reference by showing you a sampling of texts at various Lexile measures. Many of you are probably just like me in that we haven't read all of these texts that I'm about to show you. However, we probably know just enough about many of these titles to have a rough idea of their content. We begin here, below 0 on the Lexile scale. But in this space, we don't actually use negative numbers or the negative sign. No one wants to stigmatize a child or a book in such a manner. Instead of the negative sign, we use the abbreviation BR for beginning reader as a replacement. So, a text like the book The Very Wet Dog measures at BR 180L, or 180 Lexile below 0 on the scale. And as we see in these example pages, the majority of the story is told in pictures with only a few brief, incomplete sentences. In the car and in the park. Hence, the low measure of text complexity for this work. Again, visualize the mercury rising in a thermometer as the temperature increases as I reveal these texts of increasing complexity. As we come up the scale, a book such as M.C. Higgins's Fish Boy measures 160L on the Lexile scale. Here, we see a story told in sentences and pictures, but those sentences are now a mix of complete sentences and fragments and tend to be very short and declarative. As we continue up the scale, we see Charlotte's Web measures 680L on the Lexile scale. A chapter book with complete sentences and paragraphs, but yet still obviously written for younger readers. Coming up a bit more, here's Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets at 940L, a great example of that range where the largest number of books fall on the Lexile scale, in the 800Ls and 900Ls. More complex texts, say something like Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter, weighing in at 1420L, with its elevated vocabulary and complex sentence structure, continue our journey up the scale. In fact, the scale has no upper limit. A freshman level university biology textbook, Sustaining Life, comes in at 1600L. And actually, there are a very, very few titles that are above 2000 Lexiles. Again, I've shown here a sampling of books that helps us to imagine specific points along the Lexile scale. And I'll share a resource a bit later in this recording that expands on this idea. But it's important to remember that the Lexile framework for reading involves two kinds of measures: a measure of text complexity, but also a measure of reader ability. And that is one of the unique elements of the Lexile framework for reading. The fact that it is what is called a conjoined measure, meaning that it places both readers and text on the same scale. In terms of measuring the complexity of text, a Lexile measure focuses on two important elements: syntax and semantics. In terms of syntax, we know that longer sentences tend to be more complex, and they require more of our short-term memory to process than do shorter sentences. Therefore, the Lexile measure of a text with longer sentences is higher than a Lexile measure of text with shorter sentences. Likewise, the semantic element acknowledges that more difficult and more unfamiliar vocabulary also increases the complexity of text. Less familiar words may impede reading fluency and affect comprehension. So the Lexile measure of a text with more difficult vocabulary is higher than a text with more familiar and less challenging vocabulary. On the reader's side of the Lexile framework for reading, when we talk about a Lexile reader measure, we are simply talking about the ability of a reader to derive meaning from what they are reading. In other words, a Lexile reader measure is a measure of reading comprehension. It is not a measure of fluency. It is not a measure of a student's ability to decode. It is a measure of their reading comprehension only. So, a student who is a 770 Lexile reader is ready to read, independently and without any instructional scaffolding, a 770 Lexile text. Again, the Lexile framework for reading allows us to match students and text to maximize their learning opportunities. If texts are too complex, students can grow frustrated and they may quit reading. And if texts are too simple, students can sometimes grow bored and may also quit reading. We want to ensure that we land somewhere in the middle. Much like the Goldilocks fairy tale, we know that student learning is optimized when a match between readers and text is just right. In this example, we can have confidence that a 770L reader who sits down to read a 770L text, in this case, Sharon Creech's Walk Two Moons, will see enough familiar vocabulary and simple sentence structure to make reading comfortable, but also enough new vocabulary and more complex sentence structure to continue growing her reading skills. This is important to keep in mind for growing our students' independent reading abilities. In fact, we know from our research here at Metametrics that a student's independent reading growth, again, reading that is done largely without any intervention from an adult, is optimized when that student reads within his or her Lexile zone, defined as 100 Lexiles below the reader measure to 50 Lexiles above the reader's measure. That's not to say, however, that a Lexile measure should ever be a reason to take a book out of a reader's hands. In fact, we should encourage students to read a variety of texts at a variety of levels of complexity. But particularly for reluctant readers who may not read as much or as often as other readers, it becomes important that we maximize the interactions with text they do have. And the Lexile zone helps us to do just that. In the classroom, however, there are many times when we are not asking students to read independently, but rather are providing our students with direct instruction, often with challenging text that is above their Lexile zone. Here too, Lexile measures are an important tool. Gauging the reading ability of the student against the complexity of the text helps us to begin to think about our planning and the kinds of scaffolding that we may provide students to help them be successful with challenging text in a classroom setting. If this isn't familiar, it probably should. Most models of text complexity now identify three specific elements: quantitative measures, qualitative measures, and reader and task considerations. Quantitative measures, of which Lexile measures are one option, have to do with the readability of text and are often best measured by computer software. Qualitative measures, which include levels of meaning, structure, the conventionality and clarity of language, their knowledge demands, are those qualities that cannot be measured by computer software. These are the qualities that require an attentive human reader to gauge those elements across an entire corpus of what that individual has read. And finally, there are the reader and task considerations that we as education professionals need to consider when we're making that match between a student and a particular text. These things involve background knowledge that a reader may or may not possess, the level or reasons for motivation that a student may have to read, and certainly thinking about the kind of tasks that are going to be assigned after reading. Again, what we see here is that a Lexile measure, a quantitative measure of text complexity, is a critical first step in determining a text's overall complexity. It's also important to note that being ready to read a text doesn't necessarily mean a student should read a text. And just as temperature doesn't tell us everything about how warm or cold it may feel outside, a Lexile measure doesn't tell us everything about a text or everything about a reader. As you see here, Lexile measures tell us little or nothing about age appropriateness, textual supports, or even quality. It's merely a measure of the complexity of the words and sentences on the page. Likewise, a Lexile reader measure tells us little to nothing about a reader's level of interest or background knowledge in a particular topic, or the context or purpose for their reading. But just like a thermometer, the Lexile framework for reading provides us a tool to make more informed decisions about pairing students with text. A Lexile measure is never the end of a conversation about text complexity or about pairing students with text. It is the beginning. It's a jumping off point in our journey to examine the relationship between readerability and text complexity. On this slide, you'll see that I've synthesized 3 ways that the Lexile framework for reading can be utilized. And each of these 3 ways has immense value in an educational setting. The first of these 3 ideas deals with targeting our instruction to our students' ability levels. Any group of students has a wide range of reading abilities. And by targeting our instruction and targeting the materials they read directly to the unique ability level, we can actually optimize the learning that occurs. Second on this list, you'll also see that we have the ability to promote growth and monitor the progress of our students using the Lexile framework for reading. As I said before, the Lexile framework has been linked with a variety of different assessments and a variety of different instructional programs. And so the Lexile scale can be a single scale that can walk across different assessments and different instructional programs, so that throughout a child's K-12 learning experience, we have one common, consistent scale that we can use to watch their progress over time, instead of having to change scales each and every time we change assessments, or each and every time we change instructional programs. And that leads me directly into number 3 on this list, and that's the ability to communicate student achievement more effectively to a variety of different stakeholders. So again, we don't have to learn a new system or learn a new scale from one year to the next. We have the common, consistent scale of the Lexile framework to simplify things for all stakeholders. In a future webinar, I will happily dive more deeply into these 3 topics as time limits my ability to do so here today. A number of resources are available to help deepen your understanding of the Lexile framework for reading and to help communicate the value of the framework to others. Linked here are short videos, the Lexile map, which offers examples of specific texts at specific points along the scale, as I did earlier in this recording, an infographic, and 2-page guides designed for educators and for families to help explain Lexile measures. These resources are available at the web page linked in the chat window. There are also a variety of research-based tools to help you utilize these measures with students. All of these tools are available within the Lexile and Quantile Hub, which is being provided to educators in your state completely free of charge. The Lexile and Quantile Hub, a kind of one-stop shop for all of the Lexile tools, can be accessed by visiting hub.lexile.com. Again, due to time constraints here today, I'm unable to provide you with a tour of these various tools, but I will do so in a future recording. Once at the Hub, the first thing you will want to do is register an account. The purpose in doing so is twofold. First, having an account allows you to save and favorite the resources you find for easy access later. And second, the account allows us to provide you with the free access we mentioned earlier. So please, be sure when creating your account that you register with your school email address, as that is what is used to verify your status as an educator in one of our partner states, saving you $17.99 per year. Here is a listing of all of the Lexile tools and their functionality currently available in the Hub. This list of tools will continue to grow over time, as will the functionality of each tool based on feedback from users such as you. Again, I look forward to providing you a tour of these tools at a future date. And so with that, I'd like to thank everyone for their attention to this information today. And I hope that you are leaving this recording with a few key takeaways. Because with Lexile measures, we can, 1, gauge the degree of challenge between the ability of individual students and the difficulty of text. 2, access free tools and resources to connect students with more than 1 million articles, books, websites, and other texts. 3, take a longitudinal view of student growth toward our goals of college and career readiness. And 4, communicate more effectively with parents and our communities about children's learning and progress. Please, if you have any questions, or if you would like any additional information about the Lexile Framework for Reading, please do not hesitate to send us an email. We'll be more than happy to talk you through any issues or any questions that you may have. From all of us here at Metametrics, thanks again for your time today. We hope that you have found this on-demand webinar, an introduction to the Lexile Framework for Reading, to be beneficial and a wise use of your time. Thank you also very, very much for the work that you do. Have a wonderful rest of the day.